Musau, a research analyst with the Standard Investment Bank, is our market watcher for the day. Many thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you.
Now, kicking off with the bear run that we have seen in the stock market, this is the fifth session that it's dipping, and we've seen the banks finishing their full year report, their first half earning reporting, and now we have just a few that are left to report, like Kenyan, KPLC, Mumias. Are they enough to spur the market?
I think for the most part, what's driving the market, especially the bear run for the last week, we've seen a bit of foreign investor selling, especially in some of the large caps. East African breweries was one of the counters sort of taking a hit, and Kenya Commercial Bank as well, after it released what we thought were actually good numbers. And I think that trend could continue, maybe a bit of profit taking. Those counters have had a good run. The next few counters, Mumias Sugar, for example, we expect them to report disappointing numbers.
They have already issued a profit warning.
Yes, that's correct. So unless they really surprise to the upside, we really don't expect them to spur. I mean, Kenya Power, again, there's a bit of restructuring going on in the power sector. So again, that until we get clarity from a legislative perspective, then I think in the near term that might not really provide any catalyst to the market.
What can we expect this month as we begin it?
I think one of the key things we are looking at is the Safaricom, the dividend books closure coming up in the second week of this month. So that's something that we expect to watch quite keenly. It's been a bit volatile, but quite a lot of activity, people buying in, others,
profit taking.
Yes, profit taking. So otherwise, the rest of the numbers, the full year numbers for some of the companies with junior ends, otherwise nothing much.
So the bear run is likely to continue.
Yes, that's correct.
Where do you cap it at the moment? You're at 4,679. Where do you see it dropping to?
I think it really depends when you combine, a bit of that bearish aspect with maybe what the politics that might be happening. So you have the international crimes court cases starting against the president and the vice president, especially those will be very key. But otherwise, I don't really see anything else which is significant. The market may just hold on where it is. We've had a very good run this year. Yes.
All right. Looking at the general environment that you're operating in, we saw inflation rising to 6.67% in July. Do you see it rising further? Because they're looking at new fuel levies that came in from the imposed taxation that any imports from Pretoria will attract. And also you have the VAT bill which has been passed, which is supposed to commence today. How then do you see inflation trailing in the rest of the year?
The VAT bill has elicited a lot of debate, but I think the main push by the government, especially from a business perspective, is really to simplify taxation. Kenya has been ranking very poorly in terms of the complexity of the tax system, and what the new VAT does is to really reduce the number of exempt items and zero-rated items. And so essentially enabling a much more better playing field for business and simplicity in terms of filing tax returns. But obviously there is the knock-on effect, especially for consumers.
But at least there's some relief because some of the essential food commodities, some medicine and also some seeds are still in the exemption category. Yes. But is that enough to have approval on inflation?
No, we're still going to have an increase in inflation, but I think the overall impact is that if you have a better playing field, then net for an economy will probably be a lot better. But obviously there'll be a bit of pain in the initial phases.
Yes. We saw the government's target for inflation is a maximum of 7%, and now we are edging much closer to it at 6.67% as of July. Where do you see this heading? I
think before the end of the year we might reach this level. I think end of September those numbers will be really key, the inflation numbers, but it looks very likely that we might breach this level just given what might happen. I mean, we have issues relating to fuel you've mentioned. The inefficiency at the Kenya Petroleum Refinery still remain. And we've been seeing a bit of weakness on the currency, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because we've been running a very significant current account deficit. So for the most part, I think the direction is not bad, in terms of correcting those imbalances, but we shall see a bit of pain, towards the end of the year.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the weather, whereby the meteorological department has said that in the fourth quarter they expect lower than normal rains and also poorly distributed rainfall. Of course, this will have a major impact on agriculture because Kenya is mainly a rain-fed country in terms of agriculture. What impact do you see this having, especially on food distribution and reliance on also imports, on food imports, I mean?
Well, in terms of the grain, most of the main rains, the main grain basket is really in Western Kenya, and the growing period is usually, when we really need the rain is probably the first half of the year, maybe slightly into the third quarter. We think that's going to, so the fourth quarter rain distribution will not have a major impact from a grain perspective, even though now it depends on how the harvest of the current crop is going to happen. That's not going to have a major impact. But the things like vegetables, tomatoes, and all that, those are the ones which are going to have an impact, and so that also do tend to have an impact on inflation.
Do you see it also having an impact also on economic growth? The Treasury came in early last week and said that they expect a growth of 5.6% from 4.7% last year. Do you see them probably downgrading some of these numbers?
I think there's been a lot of optimism, especially after the elections. Things look like they've picked up pretty quickly. And unless there's really a major shock on the economy, I think we are really on target to hit that number.
All right. For this week, are there any particular stocks that you'll be eyeing?
Not really. Obviously it depends. The ones I mentioned earlier, East African breweries, will be just watching to see whether it comes off further or whether it will sort of stabilize. The banking sector, of course, most of them have reported the numbers. Depends on how things are. Really, we don't have any major catalyst. So it's just looking out at any new reported numbers. Otherwise, for some of the big names, the figures are out there. So.
Okay, and looking at it from a perspective of investors and in relation to inflation, do you see them also, probably shying off from the stock market savings and investments as inflation continues to tick up?
It's a tricky situation for investors because interest rates are also rising.
Yes.
But the government also suggested last week that they could put in, they could raise through the sovereign bond more than 1 billion that they initially anticipated. So if they raise maybe 2 billion, for example, then that would be a big figure which will have a major impact on the money markets locally. And
because they will not have to come in and borrow heavily as they're in the domestic market.
That's correct. And so, so the investors will really be left with a very hard choice of whether to go into equities or to keep on putting their money into debt. But
with the rising yields that we've been seeing in the debt market, makes it more attractive for investors to move from the bear market that we're seeing in the stock market into the debt market.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you see this probably also being the reason why we are seeing some very good appetite in the debt market?
Yeah, I mean, there is liquidity. I mean, apart from just moving the portfolio, there is also the new money which is coming in, and that new money also has to find a place. So there's that new money, where does it go? Does it go into equities or does it go into debt? And also there is the redemption. So every time there's an auction, probably there's another bond or bill maturing. So that money comes into the hands of the investor, and they have to decide where to put the money. So that liquidity is really creating a challenge for portfolio managers.
I'm sure we'll have a look at how the 182 and 364 will perform on Wednesday, as well as the 91 DT bill on Thursday. As always, many thanks for joining us. That is Eric Musau. He's a research analyst with Standard Investment Bank. Kenya markets update comes to a halt at that point.